Hello and welcome to Dialogue. A prosecutor for the International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for both Hamas and Israeli leaders on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. In response, the U.S. has threatened to impose sanctions on the ICC. And amidst the students' protests sweeping across U.S. campuses, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a controversial bill that expands the definition of anti-Semitism, raising concerns about freedom of speech in the United States. What is the next step in the arrest warrants? What is the current development of the students' protests in the U.S.? And is the anti-Semitism awareness bill really aimed at addressing what it says? In the first half of the show, I'm joined by Professor Jeffery Sachs from Columbia University, where the protest initially began. Later, I also spoke with Sahar Muhammad Hamis, Professor of Communication at the University of Maryland. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Professor Jeffery Sachs, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor has applied for arrest warrants against the top Israeli and Hamas leaders, and the U.S. has responded with a threat to impose sanctions on ICC. What's your response? How do you make of the latest development?
Well, if the U.S. Congress and administration were to behave that way, it would just expose their complete hypocrisy. Because when the ICC rules in a way the U.S. likes, it applauds the court. When the ICC rules in a way the U.S. doesn't like, it threatens sanctions. That's not rules, that is hypocrisy. And so I very much hope that some common sense will prevail in the United States. What the ICC has done is correct. Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. Those war crimes need to stop.
Well, not long ago, actually, U.S. President Biden basically welcomed a similar arrest warrant for the Russian leader, President Putin. And also, of course, before that, such warrants for African leaders. But when it comes to the Israeli leaders, there's a strong rejection and criticism, condemnation from the U.S. side. So people would point to that kind of action as, say, double standards. Is that the case?
It is a double standard. The U.S. thought up until now, and when I say the U.S., I mean, of course, the people in Congress and in the government, in the administration, felt that the ICC was more or less doing the U.S. bidding. Now the ICC is showing some independence and it's showing objectivity, and that is against the U.S. idea, because these leaders thought they controlled the court, not that it was an independent organization. Now they're finding out it has some independence. This, of course, is a good thing. We need international law, and we need all of the countries of the world to respect the international law. If there is a rule-based system, the only rules should be the internationally agreed rules under the UN Charter.
Mm-hmm. If the U.S. goes ahead and impose sanctions on, say, prosecutors of the ICC, what is the implication? What is the impact on international law?
The implications would be very serious. Of course, the U.S. already took an arbitrary step where it threatened the court if the court ever went after U.S. military officials or U.S. citizens engaged in U.S. military actions. So the U.S. already has a double standard, but the double standard would be even more visible and more stark if the U.S. were to try to put sanctions on the ICC. It would have a terrible backlash. The world opinion would be very negative. I think the hypocrisy of the U.S. would be rejected and ridiculed all over the world. So I hope that the U.S. doesn't follow such a misguided course.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, there are European nations recognize the state of Palestine, and at the same time, we do have these ICC arrest warrants. You think that will put some pressure on the Israeli side to take this two-state solution more seriously?
The one country stopping the two-state solution is not Israel, but the United States, because the U.S. vetoed Palestine's membership in the UN just a couple of weeks ago. If the U.S. had not vetoed that resolution, Palestine would become the 194th UN member state, and that would be the basis for peace. Israel rejects the two-state solution, that we know, but we need the world community to say Israel cannot veto a state of Palestine. This is not up to Israel to veto a state of Palestine. It is up to the member states of the UN to welcome the state of Palestine. So the U.S. is the single barrier to the world community welcoming the state of Palestine. And the U.S. government needs to hear from all the governments in the world. Now, Israel, of course, will object, but all the rest of the governments, the 191 other countries, to hear from them, you, United States, are blocking peace. You are blocking a solution in the Middle East. You are blocking a solution we all agree to. You are blocking a solution that is part of international law. This is what the U.S. needs to hear very clearly from its peers, from the other 191 countries of the UN. I don't expect to hear it from Israel, but Israel should not have a veto over a state of Palestine as a UN member state.
Mm-hmm. Well, partly, I guess, in response to what's happening in Gaza, there are popular protests in the U.S. campus. Actually, more than 120 universities, you witnessed this protest over the past weeks. Well, we also see that more than 2,900 students and faculty members were either arrested or detained. The reasons are given, such as public disruption or the signs of antisemitism. But in general, we do see peaceful protests in the campus. So what do you make of that?
First, the students protest. That's okay. That's what they can do. They should do it peacefully and not block the functioning of the university. And this is what was happening on dozens of campuses across the United States. And in places where the university administration sat down and talked with the students, reasoned with the students, found a way forward with the students. In many places, such as Harvard University, my alma mater, the students said, okay, we have an agreement with the administration, we peacefully go home. But on my current campus at Columbia University, the administration did not do that. They called in the police. And this was a big mistake. And it's very unfortunate because it has led to a deep, deep wound in the university. And universities have an important role to play in our society. They should not be wounded this way. And we don't need the police coming in. We need dialogue. And dialogue can be very effective.
At the same time, we do hear, the politicians in Washington, some from the Congress, portrayed the students' protest, all the students as, pro-Hamas or terrorists even in some cases. And also there are threats to put them on the no-fly list. Things like this, is that kind of threatening to the, say, peaceful protests of the students?
Of course, the students are very much afraid. Because their pictures are being taken, the police are arresting them, they are being expelled or suspended from school, their names are being circulated in the business community, don't hire these students, they're being blacklisted. So the students are very much afraid of what's happening. This is why it's all the more impressive that they are protesting even in the face of this kind of very hard measures that they're facing.
Well, the U.S., takes pride in its freedom of speech, in the First Amendment of the Constitution, things like that. But somehow, looking from afar, when it comes to the Gaza crisis, the government, changed its face, and somehow they feel uncomfortable and, take a strong response, sometimes a harsh response to the students' protests. And what's the explanation?
Well, I think in the heat of the moment, many politicians have forgotten basic principles. They've forgotten the U.S. Constitution. They have forgotten the value of free speech, free inquiry, and protest, which is a long tradition that has many times helped to overcome injustices, like the civil rights movement or the campaign against apartheid rule in South Africa. Well, the politicians have forgotten this. I have to say, during the civil rights era in the 1960s, the politicians often were also for cracking down on such protests. But our principles need to be understood and they need to be respected because this is the groundwork for our society. And I would say, especially in universities, which are communities that study, that analyze, that discuss, that debate, we really need to keep open that discourse widely. Again, when the students are doing it peacefully, as they were on April 17, 2024, the police should not have been called in on April 18, 2024. This was the big mistake of the administration at my university.
One day after the NYPD entered Columbia University, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill which is controversial, to say the least, with an expanded or overbroad definition, as some points out, about anti-Semitism. So, what do you think of what do you think about the timing, of a quick approval of such a bill aimed at being against, say, cracking down on anti-Semitism? Is anti-Semitism, or that widespread or serious that it needs a bill to deal with that?
This is not a bill about anti-Semitism. This is a bill to stop protests of American policy vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine. The U.S. is complicit. It's a partner with Israel in the war in Gaza. The U.S. provides the munitions for the war in Gaza. The U.S. backs Israel even when Israel is so extreme that it is committing massive war crimes. The students are protesting the U.S. role. Congress is reacting to that by trying to suppress those protests. So this is really a bill not about anti-Semitism. Otherwise, it wouldn't have emerged in one day in this emergency way. This is a bill to stop the protests of U.S. policy.
Yes, and of course, we talked about the definition of anti-Semitism. It's overbroad, and there are concerns about under such a definition, and a criticism of Israel, of the Israeli government, could be criminalized. So that probably has, there's a strong response, a strong concern about that. Some people would say, what about the freedom of speech? And there's some, fear effect probably if it becomes into law, of course.
Again, this is not about anti-Semitism. It's actually, in its way, not even about Israel. It's really about the United States, because the U.S. is the ally which provides the bombs, which provides the intelligence operations, which provides the air cover that enables Israel to carry out this war. So this is a U.S. operation as well as an Israeli operation. And in this sense, these protests should be seen as a protest of U.S. policy.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your insight. Let's have a short break. We'll be back right after this.